A logistics hub is not a dramatic target. It does not fire back. It does not maneuver. It does not present the kinetic opposition of an armored column or the concealment challenge of a mobile command post. But a logistics hub that is simultaneously moving fuel, ammunition, and technical equipment for multiple Russian frontline units is the most strategically valuable target on the Eastern Front that does not carry a weapon system of its own. Destroy it, and you destroy the operational capability of every unit it serves, simultaneously, immediately, and in ways that cannot be quickly remedied regardless of how many replacement vehicles Russian logistics can eventually move forward. In early May, Ukrainian forces executed exactly that kind of strike. A coordinated attack on a Russian forward logistics hub in eastern Ukraine, combining long-range Kamikaze drones to initiate the engagement and draw out secondary explosions that marked the hub's stored contents, followed by artillery fires that systematically destroyed the infrastructure and the response vehicles that Russian forces moved toward the burning facility, produced a chain of detonations that ran for 4 hours and left multiple Russian frontline units simultaneously without the supplies they needed to maintain their operational tempo. This is the story of that strike. This is how 4 hours of fire disrupted the operational capacity of a Russian front section. And this is what it cost Russia. Not just in the hub and its contents, but in the operational days that burned with it. The identification of the logistics hub began with the pattern analysis that Ukrainian intelligence has refined into a standard targeting methodology for concealed Russian logistics installations. The hub occupied a position in a semi-industrial area on the outskirts of a settlement in the Russian rear. The kind of location that provides existing infrastructure for vehicle staging, covered storage in industrial buildings, and road access sufficient for the heavy logistics vehicles that serve frontline units. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones had been observing vehicle traffic in the area for approximately 10 days before the strike, cataloging the movement patterns that revealed the hub's function. Heavy trucks arriving carrying loads, the same trucks departing lighter, the specific pattern of vehicles associated with ammunition resupply, fuel delivery, and technical equipment distribution that characterizes an active forward logistics hub rather than a civilian commercial facility. The analysis identified 3 specific functions being served from the hub simultaneously: fuel distribution, tanker trucks, loading from storage tanks at the facility, and departing toward Russian frontline formation areas in predictable schedules. Ammunition distribution, covered vehicles arriving from deeper storage areas and offloading into the facility's warehouse buildings before smaller vehicles distributed to forward units. Technical equipment distribution, maintenance vehicles and spare parts trucks cycling through the facility in support of the vehicle maintenance operations that Russian formations conduct at rear areas to keep their equipment operational. The 3-function assessment elevated the hub from a standard logistics target to a high-priority compound target, a facility whose destruction would impose simultaneous supply disruptions across multiple supply categories for multiple frontline units. A Ukrainian commander who strikes this hub is not simply taking out one Russian supply line. They are simultaneously cutting the fuel pipeline, the ammunition pipeline, and the technical support pipeline for the Russian units, depending on this hub as their consolidated supply point. The strike package was designed to maximize the probability of destroying all 3 supply functions in a single engagement. The primary challenge was the facility's dispersal across multiple buildings, a standard Russian logistics practice that distributes stored materials to reduce the vulnerability to a single strike point. A single impact, even a large one, would destroy the building it struck without necessarily propagating destruction to the other storage buildings. The solution was a multi-phase engagement designed to use the initial strikes to initiate secondary detonations that would spread fire and explosive force across the facility more broadly than any single warhead could achieve. Long-range Kamikaze drones were assigned to the first phase. The drone operators identified 3 specific aim points within the facility from drone observation: the primary fuel storage area, the main ammunition warehouse, and the vehicle staging area where the largest concentration of loaded logistics trucks was parked. Striking all 3 in rapid sequence, before Russian personnel at the facility could organize fire suppression response or begin moving loaded vehicles to safety, was the objective of the first phase drone strikes. The fuel storage strike came first. The Kamikaze drone that hit the primary storage area initiated a fuel fire that spread rapidly to the adjacent fuel distribution infrastructure. The pumping systems, the transfer lines, the vehicles in the process of loading. The fire that resulted was immediately visible from Ukrainian observation positions and produced the thick black smoke that is characteristic of burning petroleum products. The fuel fire was the beacon that confirmed the facility's contents and the signal that the follow-on strikes had begun. The ammunition warehouse strike followed within 90 seconds. The initial detonation of the drone's warhead against the warehouse structure initiated the secondary detonation sequence that the strike had been designed to trigger. The stored artillery rounds, mortar ammunition, and rocket propellant in the warehouse responding to the impact with the cascading explosions that ammunition storage detonation produces. The explosions continued for minutes after the initial impact, each additional round adding to the destructive propagation. The vehicle staging area strike hit the concentration of loaded logistics trucks that represented the most mobile portion of the facility's contents. Trucks that, if they survived, could drive out of the facility carrying their loads before the facility was fully destroyed. The strike hit the staging area while the trucks were still there, initiating fuel fires from the vehicle's tanks that spread to their cargo before the drivers could evacuate and drive away. Ukrainian artillery, which had been pre-registered against the facility during the preceding days as part of routine fires planning, opened on the facility as the secondary explosions from the initial drone strikes were still propagating. The artillery targets were the perimeter access points, the routes that Russian emergency response vehicles would use to enter the facility and attempt to control the fires, and the peripheral buildings that had not been directly struck by the Kamikaze drones but that the fires spread had not yet reached. Systematic artillery fires against the facility's perimeter prevented the Russian logistics and fire suppression response from entering the burning facility, and also engaged peripheral buildings before the fire spread could reach them, ensuring that the full facility was engaged rather than leaving intact structures on the margins. The detonation sequence that followed ran for 4 hours. The fuel burned steadily throughout. The ammunition storage produced irregular explosions at intervals as heat propagated through stored rounds in sequence, each detonation triggered by the heat of adjacent fires rather than direct impact. The vehicle fires from the staging area added fuel to the spreading ground fires. The periodic artillery impacts on the facility's perimeter prevented organized response throughout. By the time the fires had subsided enough for Russian commanders to assess the damage, the hub's operational capability was gone. The fuel storage was destroyed. The ammunition warehouse was destroyed. The vehicle staging area was destroyed. The infrastructure that had been serving multiple Russian frontline units simultaneously was no longer operational. The Russian units that had been drawing supplies from the hub were informed at various times during and after the strike's development. For some of them, the fire's visibility, the smoke column was observable from Russian frontline positions, would have indicated the problem before any official communication reached them. The operational consequences were immediate. Fuel allocation restrictions, fire mission tempo reductions pending resupply, technical maintenance operations suspended for lack of replacement parts. Now let us examine what Russia lost. The fuel stored at the hub at the time of the strike, conservative estimate based on the facility's assessed storage capacity and the cycling pattern of tanker traffic over the preceding week, suggests 600,000 to 900,000 liters of military diesel. At wartime, logistics pricing for fuel delivered to a forward area, $900,000 to $1.5 million in fuel value. The ammunition stored in the warehouse, the secondary detonation sequence and its duration suggest a significant quantity of artillery and mortar ammunition. Conservative estimate, based on detonation characteristics, $8 to $15 million in ammunition value at current Russian procurement pricing. The vehicles destroyed at the staging area, 8 to 12 loaded logistics trucks at $150,000 to $400,000 each, plus their cargo value already included in the above estimates. Vehicle replacement cost, $1.2 to $4.8 million. The facility infrastructure destroyed, the storage buildings, the fuel pumping systems, the administrative and coordination infrastructure, $3 to $6 million in replacement cost. Total direct material cost, $13.1 to $27.3 million USD. Destroyed in 4 hours. The operational disruption cost compounds the material figure substantially. multiple Russian frontline units simultaneously losing supply across three categories: fuel, ammunition, and technical support, creates an operational degradation that cannot be quickly remedied regardless of logistics management effort. Emergency resupply from deeper storage requires transportation coordination, vehicle availability, and route movement that takes days. During those days, the affected units operate with reduced fuel reserves, reduced fire mission capacity, and deferred maintenance that accumulates into equipment availability problems. The specific simultaneity of the multi-unit impact, multiple Russian formations experiencing supply disruption at the same moment rather than sequentially, compounds the difficulty for Russian logistics commanders. Managing one unit's emergency resupply is a manageable challenge within a strained logistics system. Managing the simultaneous emergency resupply of multiple units across multiple supply categories pushes logistics management capacity to or past its limits, forcing prioritization decisions that mean some units wait longer than others, and that the overall supply restoration takes longer than it would for a single unit disruption. Ukrainian Kamikaze drone operators identified the aim points and struck in rapid sequence. Ukrainian artillery crews had pre-registered fires and executed them as the secondary explosions confirmed the facility's contents. Ukrainian intelligence analysts had spent 10 days building the targeting picture that made the strike possible. 4 hours of fire, multiple supply chains cut simultaneously, an entire front section operating at reduced capacity for the days required to rebuild what burned. Ukraine strikes what sustains the invasion. Ukraine destroys the hub before the supplies it carries can reach the guns and the vehicles they were going to feed. Ukraine holds the front against a force whose operational tempo is reduced by the supplies that will never arrive. The hub burned. The smoke rose for hours. The units that were drawing from it are managing with what they have. And the eastern front that those units were supposed to push against is still Ukrainian ground, still defended, still held by forces that targeted the logistics before the logistics could support the assault. Ukraine destroys what feeds the invasion. Ukraine holds what the invasion cannot reach when its supply chain burns. The front holds. The hub is ash. The supplies that were going to reach Russian frontline units are smoke above eastern Ukraine. To understand the full strategic significance of this strike, it is necessary to examine the specific operational architecture of Russian forward logistics in eastern Ukraine, and why the consolidated hub model that this facility represented is simultaneously a logistics efficiency measure and a strategic vulnerability. Russian military logistics in eastern Ukraine has evolved under the pressure of Ukrainian strike capability into a specific organizational form. Early in the conflict, Russian logistics operated through multiple small dispersed supply points, a model that reduced vulnerability to any single strike, but that created inefficiencies in the movement and distribution of supplies across a complex front. The coordination overhead of managing many small supply points, the duplication of administrative and security infrastructure across those points, and the difficulty of optimizing supply allocation when supplies were distributed across many locations pushed Russian logistics planners toward consolidation. The forward logistics hub model that emerged from this evolution concentrates supply functions at fewer, larger facilities that serve multiple units simultaneously. The efficiency gains are real. A single facility serving 4 units requires less infrastructure than 4 separate facilities, allows better optimization of available supply quantities across competing demands, and reduces the logistics management overhead that dispersal creates. The vulnerability created by consolidation is equally real. A single strike that destroys the consolidated facility disrupts all the units it serves simultaneously. The efficiency gain and the vulnerability amplification are two sides of the same architectural decision. Russian logistics planners made a trade-off, accepting higher vulnerability per facility in exchange for operational efficiency. Ukrainian forces are exploiting exactly the vulnerability side of that trade-off. The 10-day intelligence preparation that preceded this strike reflects the specific investment that Ukrainian targeting devotes to the identification of consolidated logistics facilities. A single small supply point can be identified and struck relatively quickly once observed. A consolidated hub serving multiple units requires extended observation to confirm its scale, its contents, and its service relationships. to establish not just that the facility exists, but that it is worth the strike assets required to destroy it fully. The pattern analysis that Ukrainian analysts conducted over 10 days was building that confirmation. The specific vehicle types, the arrival and departure schedules, the load states on inbound and outbound vehicles, the distribution of traffic across the facility's different functional areas. All of this built the picture of a facility that was serving the full logistics spectrum for multiple units, and that deserved the full strike package that was assembled to destroy it. The multi-phase strike design, Kamikaze drones initiating secondary detonations, artillery following to prevent organized response, and to engage peripheral structures, reflects the specific challenge of destroying a dispersed multi-building facility. A strike that simply delivers explosive to one building of a 10-building complex has achieved 1/10 of the destruction required to eliminate the facility's operational function. The design intelligence required to identify the aim points that will initiate the detonation sequences that propagate across the facility. The fuel storage that, when struck, spreads fire to adjacent infrastructure. The ammunition warehouse that, when struck, produces explosive propagation that reaches neighboring buildings, is what separates a partially effective strike from a complete destruction of the target. Ukrainian Kamikaze drone operators, who identified the three initial aim points, fuel storage, ammunition warehouse, vehicle staging, were applying exactly that design intelligence. The fuel storage was the detonation propagation mechanism for the fuel-related infrastructure. The ammunition warehouse was the detonation propagation mechanism for the explosive risk inventory. The vehicle staging area was the highest concentration target for mobile assets that could otherwise escape. Strike all three in rapid sequence and the detonation network runs itself, each explosion contributing heat and pressure to adjacent materials that extend the destruction beyond the direct impact points. The artillery's role, preventing organized response rather than adding to the primary destruction, reflects a specific understanding of how Russian emergency logistics response works. Russian forces will attempt to move response vehicles toward a burning logistics facility to either fight the fires or to recover usable materials from the facility's periphery before the fire reaches them. Either response, if successful, reduces the facility's total loss. Artillery fires that deny the access routes to those response vehicles ensure that the full facility burns rather than a portion of it. This is an operational decision that treats the prevention of recovery as equally important as the initiation of destruction. The 4-hour burn that resulted from this combined approach is the physical evidence of how effective the design was. A facility that could have been partially recovered, that might have preserved some of its stored ammunition or fuel if response vehicles had been able to enter and remove materials before the fire spread, was instead fully consumed because the artillery prevented the response that would have interrupted the burn's progression. Russian logistics commanders managing the aftermath of this strike faced an emergency resupply coordination problem that is among the most demanding in logistics management. Simultaneous multi-category supply disruption for multiple units, with no immediate replacement capacity available, and with the transportation infrastructure required to move replacement supplies under Ukrainian observation pressure that makes rapid resupply movement dangerous. The specific simultaneity of the disruption matters operationally. When multiple units experience supply shortfalls in the same time window, the emergency resupply system faces competing demands that it cannot fully satisfy simultaneously. Russian logistics commanders managing the emergency must make prioritization decisions. Which unit gets emergency fuel first? Which gets priority ammunition resupply? Which unit's maintenance deferred maintenance gets addressed and which waits? That create differential capability across the affected formations. Some units will be better supplied than others. The gaps in some units' capability will be exploitable by Ukrainian forces during the resupply period. Ukrainian commanders who authorized the strike on the hub were not simply trying to destroy a logistics facility. They were trying to create simultaneous multi-unit supply disruption that would open windows of reduced Russian capability across the sector. Windows during which Ukrainian forces could conduct the maintenance, reinforcement, and offensive probing operations that Russian operational pressure had been suppressing. 4 hours of fire to create days of reduced Russian tempo, The Eastern Front in early May is a front where Russian logistics are under systematic interdiction pressure, where the vehicles that move supplies, the storage points where supplies accumulate, and the distribution infrastructure that delivers them to frontline units are all targets for Ukrainian strike operations. The forward logistics hub that burned in this engagement is one point in that systematic campaign. The 4 hours of fire it produced represent one engagement's worth of the operational disruption that the campaign accumulates over time. The hub burned. Multiple Russian units are managing supply shortfalls they did not plan for. The assault operations that those units were prepared to conduct are delayed while they manage the logistics crisis that 4 hours of fire created. Ukraine targets what feeds the invasion. Ukraine burns what it finds. Ukraine holds the ground that Russian forces cannot advance against when they are waiting for supplies that are not coming. The front holds. The logistics hub is ash, and the Eastern Front in early May is defended by Ukrainian forces that target Russia's supply chain as systematically as they target its armored vehicles. One hub, 4 hours, multiple units affected, days of disruption. That is what Ukraine's logistics interdiction campaign looks like, one strike at a time. There is a final element of this engagement that belongs in the record. The one that connects the intelligence analysts, the drone operators, and the artillery crews to the Ukrainian soldiers on the Eastern Front, whose operational environment improved because a logistics hub burned. Ukrainian defenders at the forward positions in the sector being served by the destroyed hub will experience the effects of its destruction indirectly. Russian fires will be less frequent for a period. Russian vehicle movement will be reduced. The pressure that Russian operational tempo had been applying to Ukrainian defensive positions will ease, not dramatically, but measurably. The specific easing that comes from a Russian force that is managing a logistics crisis rather than concentrating all its attention on advancing. Ukrainian defenders who are used to counting incoming rounds, to timing the intervals between Russian fire missions, to noting the patterns that indicate Russian operational intensity, these defenders will notice the change. They will not know what caused it. They will use it. The smoke from the logistics hub rose for 4 hours above eastern Ukraine. The defenders on the front who could see it did not know what was burning. They found out later, or they did not. It does not matter. What matters is what they did with the days that the fire gave them. Ukraine burns what feeds the invasion. Ukraine gives its defenders the days that burning creates. The front holds because Ukraine targets what sustains the force trying to break it. The hub is ash, the front holds.